Turkey Week. Today we'll look at the amount of student loan debt from state to state. Hint, California's massive $131 billion in student loan debt does not by any means qualify it as the most educated state. I'm Dr. Duke, she's Katie, and this is Turkey Week version of the Dr. Duke Show. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show, that only program that keeps you educated on the craziness impacting K-12 classrooms and college campuses around the world. This week we are tackling the student debt crisis in America. What is the problem, who is responsible, and how can we resolve it? Answer: progressives, progressives, and progressives. That's what we are talking about in the lead up to the busiest shopping holiday week of the year, because Black Friday isn't anywhere near the detriment to the pocketbook of Americans. So make sure to share these episodes with your kids, your friends, and everyone else who might be considering college that they can't afford. Today, we analyze the problem. The Business Insider magazine reported on student debt across the country. The Department of Education found the overall debt is now more than $1.5 trillion. Trillion with a T. Let me start by saying, before Katie breaks down some of these numbers for you, this is really Better Business Bureau stuff. The false advertising of universities, the false promise of universities, the quasi-Marxist faculty administrators of universities now selling a product to kids that we ought to have FDA labels on. Take this with extreme caution. Attend universities, but be warned, right? Break down the numbers for him, Katie.
All right, so when you take a look, there's a multitude of ways you can look at the statistics, but Business Insider did a really interesting way of breaking it down into 11 different statistics. We're not going to give you all 11 of them, but some of the ones that we found most interesting was just talking about tuition in general, and obviously how tuition going up means kids are borrowing more money then becomes $1.5 trillion. I'm going to say that over and over. $1.5 trillion in overall student debt is where we're at in this country. One of the things, though, they found is that tuition from the late 1980s to 2018 increased by 213% for public schools and 129% for private schools. So take that and think of how much quote unquote better education have you gotten from the 1980s till today? Answer: none.
Well, we've said that many times on this show that no commodity in American life has gone up more than the 1960s, let alone the 1980s, than the cost of your kid's college tuition. It is outrageous. The only thing that would rival it is the amount of money we're dumping into public schools, which are also part of the problem. And $1.5 trillion in debt is more than the collective credit card debt of the whole country. The entire credit, this is Black Friday week, right? You're going to go spend a lot of money over the next month on holidays. Go crazy. You outspend yourself for the holidays, and you still will come nowhere near blowing up your checkbook the way American families are blowing up their bank accounts for a college, an education that isn't doing much for kids anymore. I mean, gone are the days when a college degree was somehow a guaranteed a lifetime higher income. This is a really significant number, 1.5 trillion. And I'll go back and say this too. What's really driving this, at least in the last 10 years, is the fact that the federal government has taken over the control of the loans, right? Most loans now go through some Fed agency, and the problem with that is it's not your money. How responsible is the federal government with your money when it comes to Social Security? How responsible are they with your taxes? Why would you let them be the people who decide whether or not your daughter should get $150,000 in student loans to major in women's studies? It is ridiculous.
But Business Insider also found that as of May of 2018, in this country, there are 101 people out there who owe at least $1 million. An individual, 101 individuals owe at least $1 million in student loans. And that has actually increased because just 6 years ago, there were 14 people. So now we're up to 101 people.
Yeah, and you wonder, and that's obviously statistically a very low number.
But it's
But
insane.
you also wonder how much of that's a scam, too. How many people figured out? I have students all the time that do this. Were you telling me about a student? Was it you? This is my memory going away. A family, an undergraduate and his girlfriend decided to use student loan money on a vacation to the Caribbean. You remember this story?
I've heard of that.
Right.
I don't know if it was,
this was in the news 3 or 4 years
yes.
ago, and there was so much student loan money available, and there were so few strings attached to it that they basically took it was actually, I think, Tibet, now that I think about it, to the Far East, that they took a dream vacation honeymoon on their student loan money, figuring out what the heck, we'll just add it to the mix. Because again, there are so little checks and balances in this scheme. And you can thank, some of this you can thank on Barack Obama. One of the first things he did in 2008 when he became president was to federalize more and more of the student loan programs. You can say what you want about banks, but the one thing banks don't generally want to do is loan you money they know you're never going to pay back. Banks generally don't want to give you money with the recognition that you're not going to pay it back. But isn't that how our tax money is with the federal when we give it to the federal government? We give the feds all kinds of money we know we're never going to get back. And so you got the wrong people in charge.
And we've been teasing, which state has actually the most student debt. And you can just guess it's California. And they have $131 billion worth of students who have student debt. Texas is next with $103 billion, and Florida with $87.2 billion. And then you follow that with New York, $85.3 billion.
But we know that that's just because those numbers are high, you got to look at the populations of the state. Absolutely. And you did some interesting numbers crunching. So what state which is the state that, given its population base, is the most in debt? That would be
Connecticut.
Connecticut, yep. We don't, with Harvard and Yale, well, you got Yale there, Harvard, just north of there, yep.
Overall, when you take a look at it, the average student loan debt is about $30,000. We're finding out with the newest reports. LendEdu's, just came out with the 4th annual report on student loan debt, and they said the average person is $28,565. But if you're in Connecticut, your average is $38,000, almost $39,000.
It's not surprising that New England is at the top of the list here, because you think about the New England states all contain the Ivy League schools.
Yes.
The vastly, vastly overpriced Ivy League schools. And for some reason, kids still labor under and it's true probably of Harvard. It's probably true of Harvard and Yale. But it's not necessarily true of all the other Ivy League schools, that simply attending there at whatever cost means you're going to recoup that money back in a short time. It's just not going to happen.
It absolutely isn't going to happen. And what we're finding out, too, out of all the the students, we're going to talk about the millennials especially, but what's one fascinating statistic that I found was about senior citizens. That more than 3 million senior citizens out there are actually still paying off their student loans. And they looked at the numbers. Anyone who's age 60 plus, there's more than $86 billion out there. And how are they paying for it? Social Security.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what they're using to pay off student debt. That's where we've gotten to at this point.
We've got to disabuse the American public of the idea that college is a necessity. College is a necessity if you want to be accredited in certain areas. But it doesn't mean you have to go right away, even when you graduate from high school. One of my pieces of advice multiple times I've given on this show is no kid needs college at age 17 or 18. We should not send our kids directly to college. If I could wave a magic wand, I would require a 2-year period after high school where kids do internships, or they work at jobs and save money, or they get some real world, or they volunteer, they maybe sign up for the National Guard for a couple of years, something, before they go to college, because that real world experience is going to convince about 35% of those kids that they don't need college to do what they want to do, and another 30% that if they're going to go to college, they're going to be much better and wiser about going shopping around and being careful if they're having to pay for it themselves without the availability of these seemingly free loans.
Yeah, and we wish, anyone who just graduated or the past few years graduated took that advice, because they just found out the class of 2018, 56.99% or 57% of the graduates actually in a nonprofit 4-year public-private colleges had some sort of student loan debt. So it's easily over half the kids are coming out debt-ridden.
Yeah, and meanwhile, we must call out these progressive politicians, the majority of the Democrat field, who wants to waive these fees. This is not the way you handle this kind of malfeasance. You do not waive them. You do not simply wave a magic wand and then argue that these kids were preyed upon and then blame banks for it. That's what they do. They don't blame the schools. They don't blame the politicians. It's always the bank's fault. Blame the kids and blame their parents and blame the federal government for making this seem so attractive, but you don't fix this by waiving the debt. You find ways to convert that debt into public service.
Yeah, and what we're finding now is millennials are kind of waking up to this, oh shoot, what just happened? Whereas we found that 42% of them said the biggest mistake they actually made with their student loans was overestimating the salary that they were going to get coming out of college, because they've been told, go to college, that's how you get a good job, you get good money, and you'll be fine. So they went to college, they took out the loans to finish that degree, and then they came out thinking, I'm ready for my good job now. And they definitely overestimated what happened.
Yeah, this survey was performed by personal finance company SoFi, polled more than 1,000 Americans between the ages of 22 and 35. The second biggest mistake, besides the idea that they misunderstood what they should have majored in, was 31% not misunderstanding the specifics of the loan and interest rates. Economic illiteracy. Isn't it ironic that these kids are getting into college left and right with fistfuls of federal taxpayer money, and the whole time they're there, it never dawns on them the calculus calculate something like simple interest. Maybe they're not even capable of doing it. It really is a frustrating situation where you're almost tempted to say that the bigger your student loan debt, probably the less prepared intellectually you are for college. Let me repeat that. Maybe, just maybe, the more you're willing to get in debt for this kind of a degree, that itself is proof that you're not ready to start college yet, right? And it doesn't surprise me. I realize the population of California, but it doesn't surprise me that California has the most debt, not necessarily per capita, but has the most debt. I'm sure they're not counting all those illegal immigrants. But the fact that California has that tremendous amount of debt, really dwarfing the next state, Texas, suggests to me that there is a correlation between that debt in California and people having critical thinking skills, or not having them in this case.
Well, and we know that at the K-12 level, they're trying to get rid of, simple personal finance for any students. And we know that ever since the credit card became the easiest way to pay for anything in this country, no one really takes account of their own money and what they really do have. So they think it's just like play money. They think it's monopoly that they're doing.
This is also, it's a good point. This is also political and philosophical, though, too, with the cult of inclusion, right? This idea that everybody is entitled to everything at the same time means that when you start putting price tags on things, the progressive left just loses their mind, because money, of course, is a great separator. People who can't afford and have the money for things are going to have them more than other people. And so to take education, particularly secondary education, which is increasingly unnecessary for many Americans. We have so many trade fields that people make good money. I mean, welders, plumbers. I mean, we really need electricians to do that kind of work. And they're all unionized jobs. They tend to make a lot of money, more than unskilled craftsmen do. And particularly boys, right, who find themselves going to college, men and boys who would work with their hands, who like to be outdoors, who would rather do mechanical things, finding themselves sitting in freshman seminars being lectured to by hyper-feminist professors about how toxic they are, right? Those boys would be much better off doing internships in some of those key fields and not having to worry about the radical politicization of the universities and how much debt they have. Give me a kid right out of high school who interns for a couple years, ends up as a pipe fitter or a welder or a plumber, laughing down the road, 10 years down the road, of the sociology studies major, the identity politics major, who's got $47,000 in debt, while this kid's already making real bank every day. But we've got to get that idea into the heads of these parents that stepping foot on a college campus is not some kind of a status symbol anymore.
And that's going to close out our Monday with a monster debt problem. As always, please share the episode and subscribe to the free audio podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, and everywhere else. Just visit drdukeshow.com and click on any of the platforms on the top to subscribe.
And that's it. If you like the show and are thankful for what our meager offering to you is 4 times a week, consider supporting the show by signing up for our Patriot Club for just $25 a month. That's nothing. You keep us going and we send you tchotchkes 3 or 4 times a year. It's a wonderful, wonderful investment. Go to the Dr. Duke Show, drdukeshow.com to get started. We'll be back tomorrow at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time when we'll look at just who is responsible for all this debt. For Freedom Project, I'm Dr. Duke. She's Katie. And until tomorrow, stay out of college and stay educated, my friends.